34 through 35 this morning. A new command I give you, love one another, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.
So today we are picking up in a new series entitled Next Door, The Art of Neighboring. And the focus for the next few weeks is really honing in on what it is that we are called to be, which is a loving community of God inside these walls and outside of them. To be a good neighbor, so to speak, to be, as Jesus said, to love one another. And so that's what we're called to do. And today, we're going to be in John 13, these two verses that you just heard read. And what I'd like to do is just say a quick prayer as we enter. Thank you, Kristen, for reading and helping us enter into worship this way. And I would like to ask the Spirit to just come over this time and do what only He can do. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, thank you for John 13. Thank you for these words that were shared to us from Jesus on the very night before He would go and be crucified. God, we are looking at these two verses that are so packed with so much wisdom, and we just ask, Holy Spirit, would you just open our hearts, open our minds to see and hear the truths that these words have, and help us to encounter them afresh and anew. And so, God, we just ask that of you now. Would you speak mightily? And we're excited to hear it. We pray this in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. Amen. So we have actually been in a very sweet season right now in our church. I don't know if you have been seeing this, experiencing this, feeling it, but we have been seeing a work of the Spirit that I think hasn't been felt in a little while. You know, we've been seeing many people joining our family here, joining our church family. We've been seeing many people come to the Lord. Many people enter the waters of baptism. The Spirit is moving. God is working. And as we've been seeing so much of this, so many people committing to this community and diving in with us and just, following Jesus just as great as we can, I've been beginning to ask the question, as we've been seeing people committing to this community, as we've been seeing it growing, the question came up, what does Jesus teach about community? As we're talking about this community we have here, this fellowship of believers here at Scottsville Baptist Church, what does it mean? What is it that Jesus teaches about community? And so today we're looking at these two verses in John 13, verse 34 and 35, and we're seeking to understand what it is that Jesus has called us to be, what it means to commit to community, what Jesus wants for us here at Scottsville Baptist Church in particular. And if you didn't know this, we have a mission statement here at our church. It has a lot of values that we prioritize here as you enter into membership here. These are values that we desire to shoot for and aim for. It's kind of a direction, a way in which we know where we're headed and how we're following Jesus to the way He's called us to. And I've kind of narrowed it down. I've shrunk it down to we want to help people know Jesus and make Jesus known. That's kind of the mission here. That's the focus. And we have these core values, though, that are wrapped up within those words. And one of them, if you didn't know this, is fellowship. We desire to be a people of fellowship here, where we want to be a community of belonging, where anyone and everyone that enters these walls will always feel that they are welcome, that they have a place where they can belong, a place where they fit in. And so we want them to get engaged and join in the fellowship of the believers here at our church. That's one of the values. But another value that we have on our mission statement is one called outreach. And so outreach is the way in which our loving community, this fellowship here, reaches out and shares Jesus with others. And we want to share His powerful love, His powerful grace to the world around us, to the community around us. And so you might hear those two values, though, and think that they're separated, that they're disconnected. On one hand, you have fellowship over here, belonging, and yet on the other hand, you might have what we call sometimes evangelism, outreach. So it's not so much belonging together, but it's reaching out. And so you might think that they're separated in a way, but these verses that Kristen just read for us really show how they're deeply interconnected. That this passage shows us that they are connected in a very special way, that our fellowship, our joining together as believers, actually deeply impacts how we bring people to Jesus. Or to put it a different way, the quality of our fellowship here is the most important witness. It's the most important outreach of the grace of Jesus in our town and in this world. And so what we need this passage. We need these words from Jesus because it reminds us how we join together, but it also reminds us how we reach out, what we're called to do. And these two verses, they're packed with so much richness, but I want to do what every good pastor does. I want to share three things that we can take away from these verses, right? The good old three-part sermon. The first thing I want to share is this Jesus' command? What is the command of Jesus in these verses? The second thing I want to share is what's the reason in giving this command? Why does he call us to this? And the third thing I want to share is the power that we need if we're going to keep this command. And so three things there. What's the command? Why did he give it? And how do we have the power to keep the command? And so the first thing I want to share is this. What is Jesus' command? What is the command in these two verses? And it's really clear, actually. In verse 34, Jesus says this. He says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." The first thing that he shows us is that this is a command. I highlighted it there. I mean, that's what he's giving a command. It's not a suggestion. He's not saying, disciples, if you can get around to it, it would be cool if, you could love one another. If you can fit it into your busy schedules. I know you're busy, but you should try it, right? Jesus is not saying those words. He's saying a new command. I'm telling you what to do, and it's that you are to love one another. Jesus is the King of heaven here, speaking to his disciples and saying this command is right here before you. You must love one another. If your boss came to you as you're working about whatever it might be, if your boss came to you tomorrow and said, "Hey, you know what? I need you to get X, Y, and Z done before Friday," you would not look to your boss and say, "Hey, boss, that's a great word. Thank you for that suggestion. If I can fit it into my schedule, I'll look at things when I get home and check with my wife or my spouse or whatever it might be, and I'll get back to you and see if I can't get to it." Like, no, none of us would do that, right? Because your boss is the superior, right? Your boss is calling you to do this action. It's non-negotiable. You get it done or you get fired or you get demoted or whatever it might be, right? We understand that reality in the normalness of life when it comes to our job, but sometimes when Jesus gives us a command, we take it as a suggestion. Am I really supposed to love that neighbor? Specifically in our church, am I really supposed to love that person that sits on the other side of the room? Am I really supposed to love the person that sits right behind me that really didn't vote the same way I did or talk the same way that I do or do the same things that I do? Am I really supposed to love them? Jesus is like, oh yeah, that's a command. It's non-negotiable here. He's very clear, right? Jesus, the King of heaven, he's looking at his disciples and he says, love each other. But the truth is that we just take it as a suggestion. And it proves, and he's proving here that it's not a suggestion. This is a command. He clarifies it. You need to love. He says you're supposed to love as I have loved you. So you need to love each other. And that is an extraordinary, dare I say, terrifying, intimidating command. That Jesus, it's hard enough if Jesus was to say, hey, love your neighbor. Love everyone around you. That's hard enough, right? We know that to be true. But Jesus takes it a step further and says, you don't need to just love your neighbor, but love them like I've loved you. And that's next level. Jesus' love becomes the standard for our love. That's what he does here. It becomes it's not just like a pattern of what the disciples have to do. It's the standard for which we shoot for, which is to love unconditionally, right? It leads us to the question, how did Jesus love? How is it that he loved? He loved humbly. His love was a humble love. The context of these verses here in John 13 is that this is the same time at which Jesus was going to have a meal with his friends, his disciples, and he does something radical. They're going in to have this meal together, and what does Jesus do? He washes the disciples' feet. He comes to them and takes the lowest position, washing their feet. It's like the position of a servant, and he comes in and washes their feet. How humble is that? Jesus, the King of heaven, the one who put the stars in the sky, numbered every hair on your head, knows everything that you would ever do. That God bent down and washed the dusty feet of his friends. That is love in action, guys. That is what he is demonstrating here. It's humble love. Nothing was ever beneath Jesus. He bent down and washed their feet. And the only time that we ever think that we're above something is just because we have an overinflated sense of self. We get prideful, right? Like, oh, I can't do that. I can't wash those dishes. I can't wash that toilet, or whatever it might be. We're above something, and it's really just because we have an overinflated idea of self. It's just pride within you and me. But Jesus, there was nothing underneath him. He went and even bowed down to wash the disciples' feet. You'll even hear it later in the scripture. He went even to death, even death on a cross. He humbled himself, right? But he was also selfless. His love was selfless. Jesus loved others even though he stands to gain nothing from it. That's the kind of love that he gives. Did you know that the very night that he does this action, right? He washes the disciples' feet. That very night, y'all know how they respond to this action? They betray him. They leave him. They don't stand by him. Judas, the betrayer, who got his feet washed, would even walk out and just completely sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. All of the other disciples, they scatter and they run. They're fearful because their leader is going to got taken. And that's how they respond. Jesus is showing them selfless love, and they didn't even earn it. Really, they would go on to betray him, and yet Jesus loved them regardless. It's so selfless. Jesus' love, he loves not because of what he can get from us or what we can give him, but just simply because of who you are, who I am. That's how Jesus loves. It's selfless. He gains nothing from us. What can we give the author and creator of all things? Nothing. We stand to gain everything. It's selfless love. That's the kind of love we're called to do. We're called to give others, right? Jesus says, love like I've loved you. It's humble, it's selfless, but it's also sacrificial. His love, it's the act of washing the feet of the disciples. Really, it just points to the ultimate act of sacrifice where he would lay down his life on the cross for us. He would bear himself there, humble himself to even death on a cross, where he dies in our place. He is our sacrifice. That's the kind of love that Jesus displays to us and Jesus calls us to live into. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. Love as I have loved you, which is humbly, which is selflessly, and which is sacrificially. That's the kind of love we're called to share. Here's what Jesus is saying. Let me make it very practical for us, Scottsville Baptist Church. Jesus is saying these words to you and to me. Scottsville Baptist Church, I want you to love the person that's sitting right there next to you, humbly, sacrificially, and selflessly. That's what I want you to do. Not only the ones there in the pews, but even those outside the doors that don't vote like you, talk like you, think like you, act like you, live like you. That's the kind of love that attracts people and draws them in. It's magnetizing, if that's a word. It draws them in, right, like a magnet. That's the kind of love we're to give. The second point, Jesus' love becomes our standard. The second thing is, why does Jesus give this command? So the first thing is, what's the command of Jesus? It's to love one another. The second question, your second point in our message is, why does Jesus give this command? Why does he give it at all? Why the very night before he dies does Jesus give the command to love one another? Look with me at verse 35. This is why. He says this. The reason why you're to do this, the reason why I give you this command to love each other, is because by this, if you love each other the way that I've loved you, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Don't miss what Jesus is saying here. The main identifying marker of your being a person of Jesus, being a follower of Jesus, is supposed to be the quality of your love for the person sitting right next to you. That is what identifies you as a follower of Jesus, the way that you love your neighbor, the way that you love the person sitting right there next to you, or the person here in this room, the person outside those walls. That's what identifies you as a follower of Jesus. It's by loving them the way Jesus has loved us. Jesus is saying that's the way that you're identified as a follower of me, is by the way that you love. And truthfully, this might be surprising to you and me, right? Because whenever we think of, what if I was to ask you as you entered these doors here this morning, hey, what would you say defines a mature follower of Jesus? What would you say defines a follower of Jesus? Many of us might say things like, it's the people that just, they tear up that Bible. They're in it every single day. They read it all the time. It's the person whose prayer life is so vibrant. It never ends. It just keeps going. They pray without ceasing. It's the person whose Bible is falling apart because they've read it so much. It's the person that's always out there in the streets serving and caring and loving for their neighbor. Those are great examples, really great examples, and they're all incredibly important. But do you know what Jesus says here is the one thing that identifies you as a follower of him? It's the way that you love your neighbor. It's the way that you love them. All of those things are great. Read your Bible. You need to. Read it every single day. I'm working on doing that as well, as often as I can. Read it every day. Pray without ceasing. Keep doing it. Those are great things. Serve one another. But Jesus is saying the biggest defining factor of what you can define someone in this room as a Christian is the way that you love your neighbor. Not the way that you backbite, not the way that you talk about them when they're not there, not the way that you vote, not the way that you live, all the things that we might say, these are things that are really important. Jesus says, no, that just love them. Love them well like I've loved you, which is humbly, selflessly, and sacrificially. That is what defines you as a true believer. The Apostle Paul would say in one of the most beautiful passages about love. You guys know which passage I'm going to. It's 1 Corinthians 13. Paul speaks about this idea of love. And I think, I got it on the screen here. 1 Corinthians 1, Paul puts it this way. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but I don't have love, I am only a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal. What Paul is saying in these verses is really, I can have all the spiritual gifts in the world, but if I'm not loving someone the way that Jesus has called me to, it's worthless. It is worthless. It's like a 3-year-old playing the drums. Man, it's real loud. It gets a lot of attention, but it's not pleasant. It's not good. Like, that's what Jesus is saying. That's what Paul is saying. That if you're doing all this stuff without love, what's the point? Jesus is calling us to love one another. Paul is saying this about our religiosity and our way of going about, doing all the things that we think we have to do. Jesus is just saying love. Love one another as I've loved you. Love is the thing. It's the thing that identifies us as followers of Jesus in this world. And so what we need to say, like at Scottsville Baptist Church, we say here as in this community that we are a people of fellowship. We are a people that are about outreach. But truthfully, you know what needs to happen? We just need to love one another well. Like if that's what our fellowship should look like, is loving each other well, supporting our brothers and sisters in here, encouraging our brothers and sisters in here, coming to the side and helping bear one another's burdens as we're called to do. We're called to love them well. Jesus says when you do that well, it's like a magnet. People are drawn to it. It's incredibly beautiful. It's something that they need and they want. But equally so, you and I have probably had experiences that we've been in church communities where they did not love well. And when that happens, it's not magnetizing, it's polarizing. It causes the people to doubt the faith. It causes people to leave the faith and leave the church. And that's what happens when we don't love one another. And so that is a warning. This command, it means the world. That's why Jesus is saying it. We got to do it. Because it draws people in, because that's what my love looks like. It brings people in. It doesn't push them away. And so would we be a people of faith that love to fellowship in love and love to reach out in love? And that's what we're called to do. Love makes all the difference in the world. And I want to press into that for just a little bit longer because it's so important. Why does Jesus say that loving each other is so important as his followers? Here's one reason why I think that it matters so much for us. Because deep down, every single human being desires deeply, they long deeply to be loved and to be brought into community that never dies. That is what we desire. Above all things, we just want to be loved, accepted, and brought in and walked with in this journey of life. We don't want to be alone. No man is an island. It's not great for man to be alone. We desire community. We want that deeply. What we want more than anything is to be loved, to be shown love, and to do that forever in a community that never dies. That's what we want. Luc Ferry, he's actually a professor. He teaches philosophy at the University of Paris. He wrote this really interesting book, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you. You can. He's not a believer, but he writes some really beautiful things. It's a book entitled "A Brief History of Thought." I mean, incredibly ambitious title, I thought. He's an expert on the history of philosophy. And he wrote some really special things. What he does in this book is he surveys all of the philosophers all throughout history. And what he does, I mean, he speaks about Plato and Aristotle, Cicero, Augustine, Aquinas, Kant, Buddha, Nietzsche, Freud, takes all of these incredible thinkers of our history and lines them all up, and he looks at them and he says, what is it that they're searching for? What are they trying to get at when they talk so deeply about all these things? They philosophize, right? Like, what is it that they're getting at? And he said this, did you know you can basically boil it down into one sentence what human beings want more than anything? And he says this is the quote from the book. Here's what we want: to be understood, to be loved, not to be alone, and to be separate and to not be separated from our loved ones. In short, not to die and not to have them die on us. And I'll say again, this man is not a believer. He's not a follower of Jesus, but he's speaking about their desire to have a community that lasts forever, to be in relationship with people that are committed to one another, that love never dies and it just goes on. That's what he's saying. More than anything, that's what people want. All of these philosophers for thousands of years, what they've been getting at is that we want to be in a group of people that love me and know me and call me to a better way of life and do that forever. That's what we want more than everything. How can I be a part of a loving community that lasts forever? How can I be joined with loved ones that show that love forever and ever and it never die? How is that? I want that. That's what we want. That's what this community in Scottsville wants. That's what the world wants, is to be in that kind of community. This is why, by the way, life during COVID was so hard, because community was separated. It was spread apart. And then now, as we're getting back into community is still so hard, because we got so divided, so separated. And now it's like, how do I do community again? How is it that I be with people that think differently, act differently, and do things differently than me? How do I do that? Because I had a really great thing going. I started to get in a rhythm with COVID, and then boom, things started to phase out. And now we're returning back into society. And it's like, how do I enter community again? How do I coexist with people that have differences than me and fight for and commit to community the way that God wants? And Jesus is saying the reason why this command to love each other is so important and it matters is because church is supposed to be that. This church, Scottsville Baptist Church, is supposed to be that community that is loving and pursuing each other with the most beautiful, magnetizing love, and that people are drawn to that. That's what we're called to. It's one thing that everyone is longing for. It's a normal experience of being in community that loves each other and it never stops. That's what we want more than anything. And Jesus says that when you do that, it's magnetizing. It draws people in. Those people that love each other that way, I want to be a part of that. That's what happens. That becomes the language of the people outside these walls that might not be connected in church. Those people love each other in a way that is beautiful. It's magnetizing, and I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of it forever. And that's what drew people in, not only today, but all throughout history. This happens. It happened throughout history. Let me give you one example from the history books, going all the way back to the very beginning of the church. Some of you might know that the first few hundred years of the church, it was really the church after Jesus' death, right? His death and resurrection, the church began to grow. But Christianity, it was real slow at first, because to join the Christian faith was a really big deal. Because during this Roman Empire, the Christian faith began to explode and grow and go everywhere. People lost everything in joining the church. In those few centuries, I mean, it was immensely difficult. You would literally lose all of your social credibility. You would even be excommunicated from family by joining this faith. But people were so drawn and so just attracted to the love that they had for one another that they said, that's better than anything that I've got. And I want to be a part of that community. I want to be a part of those people, because it's not only affecting here and now, but it seems to last forever. And I want to be a part of that. And they came in droves. It was incredible. And there was this historian at the time that way back in the beginning of the church where this plague happened. There was this really big plague, and we know what it's like to live during a plague now, right? A pandemic. And so there was this really big plague that happened within the Roman Empire. And I'm trying to find his name here. I'd written it down. Dionysius of Alexandria. He was a saint, a priest at this time. His name was Saint Dionysius of Alexandria, and he wrote down some of what was happening at this time. There was a plague that happened, and really they responded the same way we did in COVID, social distancing. But it was kind of to an extreme. This is what they said. At the first onset of the disease, most people pushed the sufferers away, and they fled from even their dearest loved ones, throwing them into the roads before they were dead, and they treated unburied corpses as dirt, hoping thereby to avert the spread of the contagion of the fatal disease. I mean, that's next level social distancing. I mean, people were freaking out at this time because they're doing all of this amidst no modern medicine or anything, no technology. And so they're walking through this plague, this epidemic, this pandemic, and it's terrifying everyone. And so they're distancing themselves and they're trying to separate. But he says that was the response of most people. Most people. This is what Dionysius writes. The Christians showed unbound love and loyalty. They never spared themselves and thinking of others always. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. And with them, they departed this life serenely happy. For they were infected by others that had the disease, drawing on themselves the very sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting those pains. Many in nursing and curing others transferred their death of the other to themselves, and they died together. This is what Dionysius is writing. Why is it that people kept coming to Christianity in droves? Why is it that they were so enticed by what God had done in his church? It was because the community lived sacrificially, humbly, and selflessly. They literally gave their lives to care for the person that was sick. Everybody else was socially distancing, but the Christian church, for whatever reason, they were going out and loving the hurting, loving those that were sick, giving their lives to care for their neighbor. And the people around, all the world around them, entering in, like in the midst of this pandemic, were literally like, that is so beautiful. How could they love like that? And so they start sharing Jesus. Oh my goodness, the God of the universe, the God who created all things, loved me that way? And you guys are doing it here? It's happening here. I don't have to wait. I want to be a part of that. And the church grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it multiplied till you and I are sitting right here today, sharing that same message that there is a love that goes beyond the here and now, but it affects the here and now. And we're called to live in that love too. Humbly, selflessly, and sacrificially. That's what we're called to. The very thing that Jesus embodied, that's what our community here at the church should embody too, is that kind of love. There was one other pastor writing during this plague, this pandemic as well, and he said, it's the care of our helpless, it is our care of the helpless, our practice of loving kindness that brands us in the eyes of the world. Only look, they say, look at how they love each other. That's what they were writing at this time. Look at how those brothers and sisters in Jesus are loving each other. The question I had after reading this history is, what brands us in the eyes of Scottsville? When we're walking around the street up here, when we hear the hubbub of what happens in this town, what is it that brands our church, Scottsville Baptist Church? To ask it another way, if our church was to be wiped off the face of the earth, like it just didn't exist tomorrow, would our town feel that absence? Would our neighbors miss us? Are we loving our neighbor the way we're called to the point where it would literally be a vital difference in this community if we just left? I think that's a great question to ask. A convicting one. Hopefully one that gets us charged up to keep going, to live out this command. It's not a suggestion. It's a command. Let's go for it. That's what our church should look like. What brands our church in the eyes of Scottsville? Is it one of loving, sacrificial, humble, selfless love? Is that what it's like? Or is it something else? And if it is, then we need to change it. Because that should be what identifies our church. That should be what identifies me. What are you known for in your faith? We'll make it even more personal. What brands you in the eyes of your neighbors? I hope that it's one of humble, selfless, sacrificial love. Would that be what we live like? What Jesus is saying, what this pastor is saying, what the history books are saying, is that when you experience that kind of love, that intensity of love, it draws you in. And you want to be a part of it forever and ever. And so the last question finally is this. Where do we get the power to keep that command? Where do we get the power to do that love? Where is it? Loving others humbly, selflessly, and sacrificially, it's really hard to do. How can I do this? The only way that we're going to be a community that loves like this is if we already know that we've been loved like that. That's really it. If you know that you have been deeply loved in that way by Jesus, it changes the way that you should love here and right now. Come back to the text with me. This is John 13, verse 34. Jesus says, "As I have loved you, you must love one another. As I've loved you, you must love one another." Jesus is saying, my love for you must become the pattern of how you love each other. But the Greek doesn't say that at all. What it does is it's actually translated that you, out of my love for you, love each other. Out of my love for you, love each other. Jesus' love is not just the pattern, but it's the very source of that kind of love. If we don't have Jesus, we can't love like that. And so we're called to love just as Jesus loves. Jesus' love causes us to love our community. It should anyway. And if it's not, we have to ask the question, have we met Jesus? Has Jesus changed everything for me? And if he hasn't, God, help me, change me, radically reorient my life so I can love the way that I'm called to love. Like that is what we're called to. Jesus' love, it causes us to love our community, regardless of how different they might be. Like that's what his love does. Think with me, Jesus' love for you, it's humble. Jesus, he laid down his very life for you and bows down and stoops so low to wash even your feet, to serve you and care for you. His love is humble. It's selfless to the point where he gave his life even on a cross. And it's sacrificial in that same way. He lays his life down for you. The cross, really, the death of Jesus is the greatest statement of God's love for you, for this world. That's the greatest one that it's ever known. That kind of love, it's beautiful. And Jesus is saying to his friends, the night before that he is to be killed, out of my love for you, would you love your brother right beside you, your sister right beside you? That's what you're called to do. You don't have the resources to do it yourself. You can't. Not on your own strength, but with my strength, with the power of the Holy Spirit, with the resurrection power of Jesus, you can love like that. So will we accept that kind of love? That's how we become a community of love that is so enticing and draws people in. And it makes people say, I want to be a part of that. That's what we're called to do. I'm closing really quick with 3 quick points of application. The first is, are you in a community? Are you in a community? Do you have Christians in your life that know you, like know every bit of the nitty-gritty, know you, and then want to be a part of knowing you even more? Are you in a community like that? People that are doing life together. We call those things here. We have Sunday schools. We call them life groups as well. It's where it's intimate, intentional community. Are you in community? And if you're not, then I call you to get into one. Because we're not meant to do this alone. We need people that can hold us accountable, to help us to confess and celebrate and just do life together. That's what we're called to do. You can't put into practice the love of Jesus if you're not with people. And so get into community. Are you in community? That's the first thing. The second is, who are you bringing into community? Who are you bringing into community? One of the ways that we tell Scottsville, this town and this world about Jesus, is by inviting people in. So who are you inviting? Who are you bringing in? Who can you bring in? So who are you bringing into community? And then thirdly, how are you growing in your experience of Jesus' love? How are you growing in your experience of Jesus' love? What practices, what habits do you have in your daily life to know him and then help others to know him more? Are you pursuing him through Bible reading? Are you pursuing him through making worship a priority? You know, because this is the one place where we're able to come and be vulnerable and be open and say, God, I need you, and give him praise and worship. You don't necessarily always get that in community like this throughout the week. So are you prioritizing this? Are you prioritizing your reading and praying? Are there habits in your life that you're trying to grow in your experience of Jesus? 3 quick applications there. Are you in community? Who are you inviting? And what ways are you growing to experience Jesus' love? May God help us to be that kind of loving community.